Hi everyone, it's Lori Ashworth. This is our last webinar of the series. This is kind of a wrap up and really just putting everything together. We'll kind of, make this a little bit quicker. I know everyone's getting ready for the holidays, and I didn't have too many questions sent in email, but as always, feel free to ask any questions here, and also feel free to ask any questions on the follow-up. So today's discussion, we're just going to kind of review the previous topics of the last 7 weeks. We're going to quickly talk about where to go from here and kind of how to use all of this. And then I got some questions and answers, and if anybody has any other questions and answers, we'll go through that. So our first session was really on mental health overview and kind of that introduction to mental health. And we talked kind of about the normalization of mental health, mental illness, and mental fitness, and kind of the difference between those three things. We kind of talked about mental health stigmas and really kind of how, mental fitness can affect performance, how athletes can be more susceptible to, mental health issues because of kind of personality types, overtraining, fatigue, pressures from the sports, things like that. And we talked about how, when you work with someone one-on-one, you kind of discuss training triggers as well as kind of non-training triggers. So kind of those training triggers are adjusting performance fears and preparing for races, while the non-training training triggers are really kind of, talking about developing an identity outside of the sport, addressing basic needs like sleep hygiene, managing relationships, things like that. And then we really talked about kind of, how you don't have to go out this alone, and you can, work with a mental health professional and, really what that looks like. Our second webinar was on work, life, and training balance. And this is where we talked about, how we're so busy and we have all of these things and really, how we need to reprioritize. We need to prioritize and then reprioritize, and really decide at what point in our lives is what most important. And, we talked about how to set manageable goals in work. We talked about, surrounding yourself with supportive people in life, not overcommitting, getting help when needed. And then in training, we talked about really being honest with ourselves and our coaches, accepting that this is going to impact our lives, recognizing signs of burnout. And then we talked a little bit on what to do when we feel overwhelmed with all three of these things. And I had a lot of questions on this webinar, so I wanted to thank you guys for all the questions afterwards. Sleep hygiene was our third webinar, and this is really kind of my favorite webinar because I think that, sleep is one thing that is so underrated, and we can really do a lot with this to help ourselves. So, we talked about the effects of not getting enough sleep. We talked about, common sleep problems, not falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night. We talked about kind of how sleep impacts reaction times and injuries and accuracy issues. And then we talked a lot about sleep hygiene techniques. And, that was the majority of our sleep hygiene talk, such a thing as having bedtime routines, using your bed only for sex and sleep, eliminating naps, and things like that. So that was really our sleep hygiene webinar. And again, that is so important for so many things, not just sports. Our next webinar was visualizing race day. And, that was really, where we talked about that imagery, imagining yourself in that race day, using internal, external imagery, developing a pre-race routine, setting certain goals, using affirmations, getting through the race, what you'll do when things get hard, letting people know how they can support you. And, we really talked about how everybody's going to, prepare for race day differently, and how certain things are going to work for some people and how certain things are going to work for other people. which is a common theme throughout all of our webinars, but I think especially in, the Visualizing Race Day. Our fifth webinar was on coping with disappointments. And, that quote of, it's not about what happens to you, it's how you choose to deal with it that really matters. So, this is what we talked about, kind of what does failure and disappointment, mean for you, and what would an injury mean to you? We talked about kind of the 5 stages of loss, and accepting, either the injury or the disappointment, being upset in the moment, not ignoring or downplaying, and then kind of using those setbacks as an opportunity, giving yourself a time limit for these setbacks, and, recognizing you can't change the past, but, also learning from your mistakes and moving forward. So we talked a little bit about changing your perspective and really setting those future objectives. And the fact that, if the disappointment or injury is causing severe impacts in your life, really working with one-on-one support and a professional with that. Our sixth webinar is really when training becomes an obsession, and this is something that I see a lot, and I think that people need help with a lot, because they kind of don't want to admit it to themselves that, it's too much. So, we talked a lot about how there's a lot of benefits of training, and, how a lot of times that these benefits are great, and then they become that obsession. And, a lot of this we talked about in this session too was how social media affects this obsession, and how hard it is these days to kind of get out, and, really wondering if that social media is helping you or harming you. In this lecture, we talked about what training means to us, the warning signs of obsession with, training and racing, the possible health effects, and then we talked a lot about what to do about it. So knowing yourself and being realistic, talking to your coach about it, taking a break, seeking support, relying on your outside supports. And then last week was really about relaxation techniques. So, we talked a lot about the relaxation response, what that is, that state of deep rest. That's the polar opposite of the stress response. We talked about, how we can either respond to stress in the fight or the flight response. We talked a lot about deep breathing and the kind of the cornerstone of that relaxation. We went over things as progressive muscle relaxation, different types of meditation, visualization, guided imagery, and then such things as kind of self-massage, yoga, pet therapy. And then we really talked about how to practice these things. So trying multiple techniques, setting time aside in your daily schedule, giving it a chance, and, how to redirect yourself, when you get distracted. So where do we go from here? Kind of that was a general outline of all of our webinars, but kind of what do we do now with this? So I think the most important thing to do is really, now that you've had all these webinars, really checking in with yourself and, thinking about if any of these things really hit hard for you, if some of these things made you feel uncomfortable, if they let you kind of wondering a little bit further after the webinar. So really checking in with yourself and really wondering kind of where you can, move forward and really where you can benefit from putting a little bit of effort into. Prioritizing these things. So, everything I talked about, it'd be great if kind of we could just, tomorrow start all of these things, but reality is that's impossible. So let's say you're having really a hard time with sleep. So making kind of sleep your main focus at this time. Or, you really want to learn how to meditate, kind of things like that. Or, once you get really good at something, moving on to the next step. And usually kind of, really where you need to focus yourself a little bit more. Making a plan. So kind of how are you going to utilize these things? Are you going to, write down certain goals for each week and what you want to accomplish? Are you going to give yourself a timeline for some of these things? really coming up with a concrete plan to, really utilize all of these tools. And really, again, then utilizing the resources and, really obtaining one-on-one support if you feel that's needed. And again, I'm a huge proponent of kind of doing this work in the off season as well, because when we are training, we're already overwhelmed with so much, and this stuff really takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of hard work. So if you can do it when you're in maintenance mode, with training, it makes it a little bit more realistic and a little bit easier. And again, I'm always here for one-on-one and email support and training support. So questions and answers. I did have 2 questions that people did write in. The first question was for a newbie who has little race experience and not yet able to maximize visualization for pre-race strategies. What do you consider second and third best alternatives? So great questions, because some of us don't have that experience with racing, so this guided imagery is a little bit more difficult. And I would say this is really where you can utilize kind of your supports. You can utilize the race websites. You can come up with concrete plans with your coach, and you can really kind of do the work beforehand and focus on what the course is. Focus on doing a pre-race routine. On a Saturday or Sunday, figuring out what works, what doesn't work for you. And then a little part of, that race, that first race, is kind of the excitement of the unknown, and kind of, also playing up on that. You never get your first race back of anything, right? So kind of, going into it, having that newbie excitement, can also help you in realizing that you're going to make a lot of mistakes kind of your first race, and that's why it's your first race. But really, again, utilizing other people that have done the races, kind of, visualizing, the course, if you can get a hold of a course map, things like that. And again, really kind of utilizing those relaxation responses for different times, going in with a game plan of what am I going to do if this happens, what am I going to do if that happens. And then again, just being aware that kind of we can't predict for everything. And that's kind of true if it's your first race or your 15th or 50th race. And then the next question that I had, after viewing the session over training, I am wondering why the workplace considers 80 to 100-hour work weeks the norm expectation. What are your thoughts for this discrepancy? Again, this is a really reality of life, and I would love to tell people, don't work 1 hour over 40 hours. But that's not realistic, because somebody else is going to do that work and probably get the job over you. What I would say is, you really do, set your expectations, when you start a job. So really being realistic about that. When you start a job of this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. Setting yourself up for success. So, not taking emails at home if you can, or setting aside time at, from 8 to 9 to check emails so that you can still spend time with your family or train. And again, this is just a reality of our society, and I would love to say that, again, it's not, but it kind of is. What I would say is if it's 100 hours a week, maybe finding a job that, really, might fit your life better, that's a lot of work. And if you're needing 2 or 3 jobs to kind of financially put yourself through, kind of maybe seeing if you can, cut back on certain things. But again, this is a really hard question without knowing further details about kind of your life, and this would be really where individualization and kind of individual therapy, would help. So any other questions from anybody on the line? Great. Well, thank you guys so much. It's been a great 8 weeks. I've really learned from you as much as you may have learned from me. And again, kind of know I'm always here and, share any questions you have with me. And definitely share your feedback. I love hearing feedback, especially on these types of things. And this is the first webinar series I've done for QT2. So this is as new to me as it is for you. But really, I would love feedback, both positive and negative. And you guys all have my emails. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope everyone has a great, happy holiday and Happy New Year. Thanks, guys.